Were you the smart kid growing up? The one who always had the answers, who picked things up quickly, who was told you had so much potential? So why do you feel so lost now? You were supposed to be ahead of everyone else. You were praised, rewarded, told you'd go far, and yet, somewhere along the way, that promise turned into pressure. That praise became a prison. And now, you're struggling to find motivation, struggling to connect with people, struggling to figure out what's next. And worst of all, you can't even explain why. But there's a reason for this. You didn't fail. You just built your entire identity around being smart. And when that happens, the very thing that made you feel special as a kid becomes the exact thing that traps you as an adult. Let's talk about why this happens and, more importantly, how to undo it, because this isn't about failure. It's about a survival strategy that stopped working. And if you understand how you got here, you can finally start finding your way out. When we're young, identity is simple. Kids latch onto a few traits and build their sense of self around them. Maybe it's being the kid who loves dinosaurs or the one who only eats chicken nuggets. It's one-dimensional, but that's normal. And one of the most powerful labels a child can receive is, "You're smart." That phrase sticks. It gets reinforced by parents, teachers, and classmates until eventually it becomes a core part of how you see yourself. And at first, it feels amazing. Being smart as a kid brings praise, attention. You might even feel like life is on easy mode. You don't have to study as hard. You pick things up quickly. You stand out. But there's a hidden cost. When people praise you for being smart, what they're really praising isn't hard work. It's effortless success. You get rewarded for solving problems quickly, for getting an A without trying, for understanding something the first time. And without realizing it, you start to internalize a dangerous belief. If I'm smart, things should be easy for me. It feels harmless at first, but this belief quietly rewires the way you approach challenges. Because the moment something isn't easy, when you struggle, when you fail, when you don't instantly get it, it doesn't feel like a normal challenge. It feels like a threat to your identity, and that's where things start to go wrong. Instead of leaning into difficulty, you start avoiding it. You don't raise your hand unless you're sure you're right. You don't play games unless you know you'll win. You don't try new things because what if they expose you as someone who maybe isn't so smart after all? And so, without realizing it, your life begins to shrink. You stick to what you're already good at. You stay in familiar territory. You protect the image of the smart kid at all costs. But here's the problem. While everyone else is out there trying, failing, experimenting, growing, you're locked inside a shrinking comfort zone. And the longer that goes on, the harder it becomes to leave. At some point, you realize you've built your entire identity around something that now feels fragile. You can't afford to fail. You can't afford to struggle. You can't afford to risk proving yourself not smart. And that's when you stall. So what happens next? You start avoiding struggle. And at first it doesn't seem like a big deal. After all, why put yourself in situations where you might fail? But here's the catch. The more you avoid difficulty, the less you grow. Because when you've been praised for being smart your whole life, struggling doesn't feel like just struggling. It feels like proof that you're not who everyone said you were. If being smart means things should be easy, then what does it mean when they're not? So instead of pushing through, you start playing it safe. You don't ask questions unless you're sure they're smart ones. You don't take on challenges that might expose a weakness. You stick to what you're already good at, and without realizing it, you build a life around avoiding failure instead of pursuing growth. And at first this strategy works. It keeps you feeling competent, capable, in control. But over time, something else starts to happen. Your world gets smaller. You stop taking risks. You stop trying new things. You stop stepping outside of your comfort zone. And while everyone else is learning through trial and error, failing, improving, expanding, you're stuck. Because deep down, the thought of struggling, of looking foolish, of failing, feels unbearable. So you don't. You keep doing the things that make you feel smart, the things that come easy, the things that reinforce the identity you've spent your whole life protecting. But that's the trap, because if you only do what you're already good at, you stop growing. And if you stop growing, you start falling behind. And at some point, you look around and realize while everyone else has been moving forward, you've been standing still. And that's when it starts to hit you. That effortless success that once made you feel special, it's now the very thing holding you back. At first, you might not even notice it happening. You just feel a little different from everyone else, a little separate, like you're watching life happen instead of really living it. But over time, that distance grows, because when your whole life has been about being the smart one, you start to approach everything, including relationships, like a problem to solve. You analyze, you observe, you try to understand people, but in a way that feels detached, like an outsider looking in. And maybe that worked when you were younger. Maybe you could get by just being the kid who knew things, the kid teachers liked, the one who didn't need to try. But as you get older, things change. Friendships stop being about convenience and start being about connection. Success stops being about talent and starts being about persistence. And suddenly, intelligence, the thing that set you apart, doesn't seem to matter as much as you thought it would. And that's a terrifying realization. So instead of putting yourself out there, you retreat further. You tell yourself, I don't fit in because I think differently, or I just don't care about the same things other people do. And maybe that's true, but maybe it's also an excuse. A way to protect yourself from the truth that deep down you want connection, you want to belong, you want to be part of something, but you don't know how. Because when you've spent your whole life trying to avoid looking foolish, being vulnerable feels impossible. Admitting you don't know something feels impossible. Putting yourself in situations where you might be rejected feels impossible, so you don't. You stay in your head, you keep your thoughts to yourself. You convince yourself you're better off alone. But the longer you isolate, the harder it becomes to break free. And at some point you realize, it's not that you don't care, it's that you're scared. Because for the first time in your life, intelligence isn't enough. And if you don't know who you are beyond that, where does that leave you? At some point, the loneliness starts to sink in. You feel disconnected, not just from other people, but from yourself. You know something's wrong, but you don't know how to fix it. And that's when the final defense kicks in, arrogance. You start telling yourself a different story, one that makes the isolation feel intentional. I don't fit in because I'm different. I don't need people, they wouldn't understand me anyway. It's not that I can't connect, it's that I don't want to. It's a shield, a way to turn loneliness into superiority, to make it feel like a choice rather than something that's happening to you. And for a while it works. It keeps you safe. It keeps you from having to confront the truth, that deep down, you do want connection. You do want to feel understood. You do want to be part of something. But admitting that means admitting weakness. And when your whole life has been built around being smart, being right, being better, weakness feels like the one thing you can't afford. So you double down. You become the cynic, the critic, the person who sees through everything. But underneath it all, you know that pushing people away doesn't actually make you strong, that acting like you don't care doesn't actually make you powerful, it just makes you alone. And at some point you have to ask yourself, is this really the life you want? Or is it just the one you've been too afraid to leave behind? So what now? If you've spent your whole life being the smart one, if you've built your identity around effortless success, if you've avoided struggle, if you've pushed people away, how do you undo all of that? How do you break free? It starts with this. You have to let go of the idea that being smart is what makes you valuable. Because as long as your self-worth is tied to intelligence, you'll keep avoiding anything that threatens it. You'll keep playing it safe. You'll keep running from failure, from growth, from life. But intelligence isn't what makes you valuable. Growth is. Effort is. The willingness to try, even when you don't have all the answers, is. So instead of asking, how do I prove I'm smart? Start asking, how do I learn? Instead of thinking, I should already know this, start thinking, this is something I can get better at. Instead of avoiding challenges, start embracing them. Because struggle isn't a sign that you're failing, it's a sign that you're growing. And what about connection? What about the loneliness? That part is harder. Because breaking out of isolation means being willing to be vulnerable. It means admitting when you don't know something. It means risking rejection. It means showing up, awkward and unsure, and saying, hey, I want to be part of this. And yes, that's scary. But you know what's even scarier? Spending your whole life on the outside, convincing yourself you don't care, when deep down, you do. So start small. Let yourself be bad at something. Let yourself ask a dumb question. Let yourself be seen, not as the smart one, not as the one who always has the answers, but as a human being who is still learning, still growing, still figuring things out. Because in the end, that's what real intelligence is. Not knowing all the answers, but being willing to search for them. So now the choice is yours. You can keep holding on to the identity that's been keeping you stuck. The one that tells you that struggle is failure, that effort is weakness, that you have to be smart all the time to be worth something. Or you can let it go. You can choose growth over comfort. You can choose connection over isolation. You can choose to live not as the smart kid trying to protect an image, but as a person who is learning, evolving, and figuring things out just like everyone else. And if that idea scares you, good. That means you're on the right track. So start today. Take a risk. Try something new. Let yourself be bad at it. Let yourself struggle. Let yourself fail, because the sooner you do, the sooner you'll realize you were never meant to be just the smart one. You were meant to grow. And if this resonated with you, if you're ready to break free from the smart kid trap and start moving forward, subscribe. I'll be sharing more insights, more strategies, and more ways to help you unlearn the patterns that are holding you back. So hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and let's start growing together.